It's going. All right, we're live.
Okay, Charlie. So today,
Today is November 11th. It is almost 11 a.m.
right?
And what happened at 11 a.m.?
All right. Well, we had the signing of the end of World War I, the armistice that ended World War I, and we have a poppy here.
The poppy became the symbol, and it still is today, Thomas, for veterans. And actually, I got this when the convention was in New Orleans.
Charlie, the veterans of all wars or just World War I?
Really, World War I.
Okay.
It still goes on today, and now it's been expanded, but it's a good question.
Okay.
It was called Flanders Fields, and it was a Canadian gentleman who happened to see the fields with the red poppies.
And where was the field?
In France.
Okay.
And then that got started, and then this became, I believe, a Georgia doctor started wearing one right after in the 1920s.
Okay.
1926. And then this became very symbolic. Today, you'll see disabled veterans in America have competitions with these.
Okay.
And they were here every year at the convention. They show up in the chapters as part of their competition. Amazing creativity.
So what do you mean by competition? They create poppies?
They create artwork with poppies.
Okay, very good.
And you'll see
All kinds of things?
coffins,
Okay.
boots with a gun in them.
Kind of like the Rose Bowl parade, but with poppies.
And so this came from that, Tom.
Very
You
interesting.
know, it's a very interesting day. We have the World War II Museum.
So, Charlie, let's talk a little bit about the losses during World War I. How many Americans were killed?
I don't think as many, not that many really.
Right.
We didn't get in the war until
It was about 100,000?
Yeah, that's a good number.
Yeah, I think that's
I
what I
mean,
recall.
when I'm thinking like a 500,000,
Right,
you think World
right,
War II.
right.
But we got in kind of late.
Right.
I think we got in like 1917.
And we had veterans from New Orleans area, right, who fought in World War I.
Tommy, there's actually a monument.
I wanted you to talk about that. Because here we are talking about monuments.
Yes.
And there is a monument to World War I in the city of New Orleans. Let's talk about that.
It is in the lower 7th Ward, I believe.
Yes.
It's a beautiful victory arch.
Okay.
Small version of what you have in Paris.
Okay.
And they want to take that down.
Oh, my goodness. And why do they want to take that down?
When they did
Now,
that,
who's they?
there's a group called Take Them Down NOLA. Tommy.
Okay. Is that the city? Is the city of New Orleans want to take down
Well,
the monument?
interesting you say that because we got a mayoral election going on right now.
Right.
We had a school board say that they didn't want to approve a group that wanted to volunteer.
That's the New Orleans School Board, right?
Right.
Okay.
That they didn't want to approve for a group that had raised money to restore it.
Monuments Task Force, I
Yes,
believe.
they did not
Yes.
want to allow them to restore it.
Right.
So you wonder, there's a lot of
Now,
politics.
what do they mean by restore? What exactly did Monuments
Well,
Task Force want to do to this the monument?
these gentlemen-
And what was the school board opposing?
These gentlemen for 35 years have raised money on their own.
Okay.
And every month they go around the South, mostly New Orleans, but they'll go to Chalmette, Baton Rouge, and take care of a monument.
Okay.
And they saw this one, it needed some help, some
Okay.
tender loving care. You know, you think it's been up for what, 50, 70 years?
Yeah, the monument was erected in the 20s. Do you have the date on that?
I do not.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
you know, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to address that.
Okay.
And then the city school board said, well, we would like to see it deteriorate.
Now, why in the world would the school board be opposed to preserving this monument?
Well, I think two reasons. One is maybe politics, because there are some people in the community that want to get rid of the monument. So maybe the political
Get rid of
support-
all monuments?
that one. Let's stay on
Okay,
that one.
okay.
That monument on the men that fought, there's about 900 names.
Okay.
On the
So
monument.
from this area.
From this area.
And they fought, not died, right? Were some of them
both.
killed in action?
Some of them did kill.
Some killed in action. Are they listed together as a group, or how is that?
You know, that monument has four sides.
Okay.
It's got a left and a right and a front and a back.
Okay.
Three of them list the whites.
Okay.
And
So we
one
got
side-
3 plaques with white people on it, and then 1 plaque with the blacks.
With the blacks.
Okay.
So other people like
So it's a segregation
yes,
issue.
Take Them Down NOLA says it promotes racism.
Okay.
It promotes segregation.
Now let me ask you this: I'm devil's advocate right now. Why in the world would they separate the blacks from the whites in listing these dead soldiers? Or these soldiers
they had
that served?
separated troops then.
Okay, they segregate. So in other words, they were listing the soldiers by their regiment.
I don't know. If
Because I know when you go to Vicksburg,
Yeah.
that's the way you see it.
Right.
You see a huge list of
Sure.
names. In fact, that's one of the distinctive qualities that you have not in the Vietnam Memorial, where you're listing alphabetically, right? You're
Right.
not serving in a particular regiment. You're
Yes.
serving as an American. Now, back then, though, the tradition was to list soldiers in their regiments, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. But
I know that's the way it is in
I
Vicksburg.
again, here, I think though whether or not, I don't know for sure that.
Right.
It's been a few months since I read it.
Right, okay.
But the takeaway I got was you go there and you basically have really, I think, about 4 to 5 times as many, maybe many more actually, white gentlemen that served from that area.
Okay.
And it's more geographic to the 7th Ward and parts of New Orleans. So you had a lot more white people that served, but you still had a large amount.
To the plaques actually say, these men are white, these men are black. How do I know if I'm going up to the monument?
It does.
How do I know that it says? Oh, so it says Negro soldiers.
Again, unfortunately, I should have seen the.
Because you know what? I've never actually visited that.
It's
been
not
3
very.
times. It's not very.
No, and I think, Tommy, to move on.
Yeah.
I would say we're here, 500 feet,
right,
maybe 300 from the World War I museum,
right?
World War II museum.
World War II museum.
There is some land. Why not move that monument? Because it is up against nowhere.
That's right. I've never seen it.
It's up against a baseball backstop.
Yeah.
Move it to where we have.
Oh, that would be fabulous.
That monument's got to be worth millions.
Right.
And you could just move it to where people are going to see it, because the World War II museum has done phenomenal. You have people that served in both wars, or parents. So just consolidate.
Well, Charles, let me ask you another question about the monument. So, should we take the plaques off and redo them? Would that be the solution that would kind of bring both sides together on this?
Yeah.
Or should we preserve the plaques as they are?
Tell me, I would say that might be an easy solution. Just change them alphabetically, like you just said.
So you approve the idea of refashioning the plaques?
Think about it, right.
To me, I think there are compelling arguments on both sides.
Right.
One in which you represent the kind of the sentiment of the time.
Sure.
And so in communicating the sacrifice of World War I, you're also communicating the kind of zeitgeist of the times,
I agree
right?
with you there.
Or what you could do is kind of update the idea and bring it into 21st century.
In line with that, 2 weeks ago.
But you preserve the monument, in other words.
2 weeks
preserve
ago.
the monument. That's what we want to stress here.
Yeah, we
want to preserve the monument.
But 2 weeks ago, Tommy, they coordinated an air show out at Lakefront, New Orleans, and the Tuskegee Airmen were honored.
Right.
So,
right. Excellent.
If you want to consolidate it, then you can't honor that anymore. But you're right. You lose the history.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because the Tuskegee. Let's bring this audience up to speed. The Tuskegee was a segregated air unit. They were Negroes who served in World War II
as pilots.
And actually, that's the way you served in World War II. There were segregated units back then, too.
Yes.
So, in any case, the point is that if you start this idea of integration, you have problem talking about historical facts.
Right.
Historical realities.
Because how do you honor that group of men if they no longer, if you merge them and they no longer exist as an entity?
Exactly. So that's very interesting. But what we're really interested in doing, obviously, you and I, is this idea of looking at history, looking at art, looking at the way monuments interact in society, and try and understand and appreciate it as it happens.
Absolutely.
Without trampling on the beauty, the tenderness, the delicacy of these issues, especially when it comes to the art.
Right.
Because when everything's said and done, that is the thing that you experience first, and that's the thing you come away most impactfully as you leave. You want to see a visual, impacting experience.
So I want to move that to what we're here today for.
Right.
This is Robert E. Lee.
Right. It's not finished yet now.
You're getting very close. You can clearly
Well, what
see
I want to try and do now is I've got to put the sword in. I've got to put folds on the clothing. It's very difficult point because the information I'm using, the photographs and so forth, I really need to work in the studio at this point.
So the question here, you can see the pedestal, and in the camera angle you have right now, I am going to tilt it up for a second so you can see. This is what, a 80-foot pedestal?
60? I thought it was,
60? Okay.
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I think it's 60, but I'm not sure.
I mean, probably that's the steps and the very the tip right there.
Right.
But anyway, Lee used to be up there, so I want to tilt the camera so you can get a perspective of that. And that, you can see how tall that was. Roughly, that's a 10-story hotel, and it's almost level. You got to be. I remember being in the 10th floor, and you're looking.
Really? Come on, really?
Yeah, we shot photos.
It's very hard to kind of perceive that from ground.
He was 17 feet tall.
Yeah.
So the question I want to talk about today was, because I've heard this now last week, actually we had a reporter in town asking, because Mitch has set a standard.
Right.
He gave a great speech, or delivered, or was amazingly delivered. I would challenge some of the text of it.
Right.
But he said what do you say to the 10-year-old as to why Lee is up there?
Right.
Which I like to paraphrase is, are we smarter than a 5th grader?
Right.
Can we
right.
answer that question?
Right.
So I'll ask you first. What do you say to the 5th grader?
Oh my goodness.
To why Lee's there?
This is so easy for me because I loved monuments as a kid. I went gaga over monuments, and what I mean by monuments is really well done, animated figures. I love to see cannons. I love to see fortresses. I love to see all manner of things military, martial, and it just absolutely invigorated and stimulated my imagination. And so I think if I'd have been in 10th grade and seen this taken down, I'd have been horrified.
10 years old.
Absolutely. Because in my mind, in my little boy's imagination, to me it would have been such a violation of my imagination, of taking away from me material that I could use to stimulate my thoughts and my feelings about the world around me. Now, Charlie, one of my favorite things to do when I was a little kid is to go play at Spanish Fort, which is this fabulous old fortress that still exists on the lakefront. I used to climb over the rocks and over the ramparts and pretend I was a soldier in that time and period. So the point is that for a child, these things, we think about the world in an adult manner. What we have to really understand is that what children are really looking for is things to stimulate their imaginations. What they're going to do later in life. And I can tell you this from my own experience. I was a great fan of the Civil War when I was a little kid. But I didn't understand the death and destruction and the hardship that these people were experiencing. I was 10 years old.
Right.
What brought that to my mind? What made me turn from a lover of war, or is all manner of warfare, into a compassionate contemplator of war? And the answer is All Quiet on the Western Front. I think it was 13 years old, I read All Quiet on the Western Front, and all of a sudden, war became a face. It became a personality. It became individuals who were actually living and breathing and thinking about this stuff. And so I moved from a childhood understanding of the world into the first throes of an adulthood understanding of the world.
Right.
For you to expect a 10-year-old child to think like an adult is foolish. Let the child have his imagination. Let the girl have her imagination. And then when they become older and much more attuned, and it's the same thing with sexuality. As you age, you become able to understand more profound aspects of life. You're not going to expect a 5-year-old to understand death. But as we age, we become more and more attuned and more psychologically aware and able to come to grips with the notion of death and what warfare is really all about. But this is very important to understand. That entry into these ideas is through the imagination. What these monuments do for children is it stimulates the imagination. When a little boy walks on the riverfront, he sees that cannon. He's awakened. His curiosity is awakened.
So the cannon you're talking about is the Confederate cannon.
Yes, that controversial cannon that they want to remove.
No, they want to keep it. That's on the moonwalk.
Yes.
They're expanding the moonwalk.
Well, what I heard from the meeting is that they want to get rid of that cannon. Well, some people want to get rid of that cannon.
Some people do.
Yeah.
But however, the city council has decided
in their wisdom, great wisdom,
there's a monument to the Confederacy, and although
so we get to keep the cannon. Thank you, City Council. You were so generous.
Not only do we keep it, we're expanding it.
Fabulous.
And I don't get the ability to rationale how you keep a Confederate cannon and take down.
I don't know. I don't know how we keep the build up, because quite frankly, that is so intimately connected with the history of slavery and the history of this period. That needs to be torn down. If you can take down Robert E. Lee, you need to take down.
Well, another thing I would say is, as I studied this, 48 African Americans died at the Roosevelt Hotel, which used to be the Mechanics Institute. In 1866, they were going there for a Republican convention. And the Democrats were worried about this Republican voting group growing, so they sealed them off and shot them.
Jeez.
You know, and we talk about, like, when there's a slave ship museum or whatever. Why don't we have something there at that corner in Canal Street?
Well, look, Charlie, that's what it's all about. That's what we really are interested in. Yes, we want to preserve Robert E. Lee, but what we really want to do is we want to tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
We would love to see more monuments put up, and especially monuments which talk about aspects of our history which currently are neglected. I would love to see a monument which discusses the whole throes of slavery.
Right.
We need to have a monument, a memorial, in other words, that discusses what it meant to be a slave. We could do that with a slave family, we could do it as an individual, but we need to have some sort of public commemoration of the existence of this thing. And I could just go on and on and on. There's so many things we could talk about. And then this idea of, instead of talking about what happened, we're busy erasing and destroying things that remind us of what happened. It doesn't make any sense. But we can do this. And again, I want to stress this idea. Getting back to the idea of the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old, we want to stimulate the imagination of the child. By bringing monuments into our cityscape, we do that. We make the child more aware of the history. We stimulate them on a visceral level. They see the figure, they see the activeness of the sculpture, they see the beauty and the power and the authority of the sculpture. They see the architecture. When we introduce children to this, they want to know more. Why is that up there? Well, I'll tell you, little Johnny, why that is up there. That was Robert E. Lee, and he fought in the Civil War. And I can tell the whole history of the Civil War. It's an excuse for me to educate my children about the entire event. I can talk about how some of the people in the city of New Orleans are opposed to that, how they're offended by that. I can tell the child why they're offended. I can tell so many things because that statue exists. Once you take that statue down, there's no more question.
There's no more question. But what I want to say is Lee lived to be 70 years old.
Right.
His life was more than those 4 years.
Right.
So when you say that he fought in the Civil War, I think you really have to say...
You guys talked about the whole thing.
Lee's first thing is his dad, business fails.
Right.
His dad fought with George Washington
right.
as a revolutionary, was governor, went financial straits. So Lee goes to West Point for the scholarship.
That's right.
No demerits, finishes second in his class. 10 years later, he gets sent out because 2 other guys have failed. Corps of Engineers. We know about the Army Corps of Engineers here in New Orleans.
Right.
He gets sent to St. Louis, saves St. Louis because the Mississippi was moving away.
That's right.
He opens up that commerce from St. Louis to New Orleans. So he does a lot for New Orleans commerce. 10 more years go by, or about 8. He gets called up to go to the Mexican-American War.
That's right.
They use his battle plan, which is phenomenal, that he actually believed in reconnaissance and so much. So he, by himself, he went behind enemy lines, devised how to get the troops to water and move them through Mexico. All right, does that, then he devises how to attack the fort that's up on the hill. Stays awake for 3 days while that's going on.
Fabulous.
He came through New Orleans and bought his horse that he used in that battle here, called Grace Darling. Right? The war ends, he's stationed in West Texas. When the Civil War starts off, they say they're going to make him a prisoner of war because Texas succeeded along with Louisiana. So he manages, they say, you know what, we like you. Get out of here with the
Remember, he's still an officer in the U.S.
He's still an officer.
That's the point. Yeah.
And he takes a boat and he goes back to New Orleans.
That's right.
As an officer.
That's right. So he's the first officer
yes.
in the seceded new country of Louisiana.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But he delivered the commerce of those states into New Orleans because they built a railroad line.
Right.
Then he goes off after the war and he's brought into Washington University, puts in the honor system, and really emphasizes how men are supposed to treat women.
Right.
He says no guerrilla warfare here. You know, guys, we are.
And that's a really powerful point because truly Lee could have continued the war.
He could have.
I mean, they were very well aware of the effectiveness and also the butchery and the savagery of guerrilla warfare. But Lee said, no, we're not going to fight that kind of war.
Right.
And that is such a blessing to an otherwise, well, obviously a horrible 4 years of our history. But thank goodness it wasn't continued for year after year after year in guerrilla warfare.
Right. And backing up, and before that, he had 36 years as an Army officer in the Union. But when Lincoln said, I want you to lead 75,000 men through Virginia, attacking your friends and your family to get to South Carolina to put down a rebellion, he said, you know, Mr. President,
I can't do it. I can't do it.
Today, we'd probably say impeach. But they didn't. You don't see the words impeach Lincoln.
No.
They just this new president just says this is what I'm after doing, and Generally, I don't believe in killing Virginians.
Yeah, Charlie, I think this idea, this notion that we can't discuss history with our 5-year-old,
Yes.
our 10-year-old, is absolutely so misplaced. The important thing to understand is to speak to the child, to discuss history in a way that's meaningful for the child. Obviously, you're not going to discuss weighty adult issues with a 5-year-old. But what you can do is you can outline, you can stimulate, you can draw a general picture which the child is able to understand. As you as a good parent should know where that child mentally is, and you can gauge the amount of information that you're going to feed them. But the point is, this notion that somehow we can't discuss history, we have to hide, we have to be embarrassed, we have to be ashamed, is the worst message you can send to a child. It's absolutely the wrong way to go, Mitch. Mitch, tell your children about the Civil War. Mitch, tell the children about the racism. Tell them about the slavery. They need to know that. My goodness, we need to be able to deal with our history. We deal with it one step at a time. As we become older and older, we become more aware, and then we can give them more and more information.
Absolutely.
But we don't want to ever say, oh no, that didn't happen. Oh no, those events never occurred. Act as if it never happened.
Right.
It's outrageous.
But we also need to realize that in the midst of all that, there were progressive leaders like Lee, or like Beauregard that came out of that.
Yeah.
And they weren't villains.
Yeah.
So to villainize these men, you take away some of the guys that were actually the heroes of trying this, who were looking at creative ways. If you talk about Lee's writings in 1856 were like, if we do this wrong, we're going to have Jim Crow. Now, he doesn't know the words Jim Crow, but you can see him saying, if we
he knew what Jim Crow was. He understood the motivation and the impetus of segregation.
Right.
So, and so did Beauregard, for that matter. And actually, so did Jefferson Davis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Truthfully, all three of these guys were some of the most sane and rational voices in the South.
They were.
And that's why it's not coincidental that they're the ones that got the monuments in the city of New Orleans.
If you think about it, in New Orleans, as I was watching a documentary recently on the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of the battle.
Yeah.
And New Orleans had the largest percentage of free men of color in 1850.
That's right.
So you think about it, New Orleans was already working for 45 years.
It was integrated in the sense that there was a free people of color group in New Orleans that was muscular, that was vibrant. They were assertive. They had their own traditions and culture. They were on their way.
And actually, again, in Beauregard Parish is contemplating a monument.
That's right.
But they look at Beauregard as the guy who reached out to a black lieutenant governor in 1873 and formed the unification movement.
Yeah.
And his line was equal rights, one flag, one country, one people.
That's right.
Which is very close to 20 years later, the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes.
So that was New Orleans.
Yeah, that's New
Orleans.
Orleans.
We're taking that down, and we don't have to be, like you said, to have someone. Maybe Beauregard did. They didn't use his words. Maybe they did. But why wouldn't New Orleans want to say that maybe the Pledge of Allegiance was drafted right here?
Yeah. That's powerful.
Yeah, it is. Tommy.
All right, Charlie.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Great working with you. He's looking great.
Okay, let's remember to think about those World War II, World War I veterans who gave their lives for the sake of our country.
The Poppy.
On this day, the Poppy.
Today we go back and close back with the Poppy and all the World War I veterans and really everybody else that did serve.
Really the forgotten war.
Yeah.
I mean, usually you talk about the Korean War as being the forgotten war, but World War I has also kind of been pushed aside by World War II.
All right.
Okay,
Thank
Charlie.
you, Tommy.
Okay. Excellent, Charlie. That was good. Kicked ass today.
We're still broke.